Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it. Veronica took one last look at herself in the mirror, then looked at her watch. It was already time to run, for she had promised Nora to come early and help in the kitchen. Veronica was excited and nervous, because today she was going to meet John, a colleague of her friend's husband. For this reason, she had spent 4 hours on choosing clothes, going through her entire closet, as well as on makeup and hairstyling. She wanted to be irresistible, and she liked the result. Already 3 years she was alone. After a failed marriage, new relationships have not happened. Fans, of course, were, but no one was not attracted and wanted love, passion, emotions. John seemed to her quite an interesting man. Of course, the photo is difficult to judge, and the face of water to drink, because the main thing, as they say, that the man was good, with a sense of humor and charisma. And John seemed just like that, and Nora said that he was exactly what Veronica needed. With Nora, Veronica met 13 years ago, and despite the difference in age, Nora was older by 10 years. They became very good friends. The new friend had just moved with her husband, 12-year-old son, and 7-year-old daughter into the apartment next door to Veronica. Light, cheerful and cheerful, Nora became over the years a very close person for Veronica. And 6 years ago their family bought a 2-bedroom apartment in a new neighborhood and safely moved there. Since then, the friends have seen each other much less often. And today was Nora's 43rd birthday. How time flies, Veronica thought and sighed. She herself is already 33, and long ago it was 20. The 30-years-old friend already had 2 children, and Veronica had none at 33. Her parents had already bored her with the question of when she was going to make them happy with at least one grandchild. It was a sore subject. She herself very much wanted to become a mother, but what to do if her husband turned out to be a big disappointment in her life, and to give birth from the first man she met? She was certainly not going to. "You're impossible to please," her school friend Tabitha had told her. "You're too picky about men." "I'm not picky," Veronica replied. "I just don't like anyone. You can't force yourself. You have to look at them, meet them, and you just cut it off at the root. No, that's all. So if I don't like someone right away, why waste time?" "Well, sometimes you don't like him first, but then you talk to him, get to know him better, and you like him." "Yeah, they just want to get in bed after the first date, but I can't do that. They're not interested in spending time courting." It's true. But let's hope things work out with this John. He looks like a pretty good-looking guy. And Nora praised him. She said so herself. "I hope so." "Oh, Tabitha, you want passion, love, to make your heart leap out of your chest and the ground fall away. Passion one day, gone the next. And love is something more calm, cozy, warm. No hurricanes. And you can't go far on passion alone. And you need to create a family, give birth to children. And in general, you should choose a man with your head, sensibly, not in a rush of passion. The main thing is that he loved, cared, that everything for the family." "Is there no passion between you and Jacob at all?" Veronica asked her friend, who had been married for 8 years. "We're calm. No storms or hurricanes. It's calm, and I like it that way. We're used to each other, and I'm comfortable with him." Veronica rode in the cab and thought that Tabitha was probably right. And what hurricanes at the age of 33? Maybe you really need a quiet harbor and a complete calm. 20 minutes later, Veronica was already on the doorstep of her friend's apartment. The door was opened by Nora's daughter Alice. "Come in!" Nora shouted from the kitchen, and Veronica hurried to help her friend. "Cut some pickles and sausage," she asked her. "And where did you put your husband?" Veronica asked her, throwing the sliced cucumbers into the salad bowl. "He went to the store. As always in this turmoil, you are bound to forget to buy something. I didn't tell you what present my son gave me today, Nora smiled. He's coming to my birthday party today. Wow. He's coming all the way from Washington for the weekend. Veronica asked her friend because her son had graduated from the capital's university and stayed there to work. No. For good. They have a branch opening in New York, and he transferred here. That's the best gift ever. I missed him so much. He's got a girlfriend, so he's dying to come here, Alice told her mother. Well, that's good. Oh, how time flies, Nora sighed. I'll marry my son and become a grandmother. And in my heart, I'm still 18, eh? Yes, time flies fast, agreed with her friend Veronica. Alice, what kind of girl is she? Nora looked at her daughter. I have no idea. Maybe today she'll bring her. So we'll see, she answered. Suddenly the doorbell rang, and Veronica flinched in surprise. She thought it was John, and the excitement before the upcoming meeting was growing. Alice, open the door. My hands are dirty, Nora said to her daughter. Christopher. There was a joyful cry in the hallway, and Nora immediately ran to meet her son, wiping her hands on her apron. Wow, Veronica exclaimed as Christopher entered the kitchen. The boy's grown up, hasn't he? Nora asked her with a smile. He has. The last time I saw Christopher. Veronica wondered how old he'd been the last time they'd seen him at Nora's. 7 years ago, he said. Aye, Veronica, you haven't changed at all. But you have changed, Veronica said, looking at the tall, handsome man. I remember you as a 12-year-old boy. I'm not him anymore, Christopher said with a smile. Can I help you? No, son. Have a seat. We're almost done here, said Nora, stroking her son's back. Why did you come without a bride? Veronica asked him. And you want a bride right away, he replied, not stopping smiling. And I would have brought her and introduced her parents, Nora said. Some other time. Where's your father, by the way? He went to the store. He should be back by now. His mother answered him. How are you? He asked Veronica, sitting down on a stool. Fine. She lied and stared at Christopher again. I still can't believe it's you. I see you're smitten, he answered, not taking his eyes off her. Front door swung open and Oswin, Nora's husband, appeared on the doorstep. Christopher, he said cheerfully, looking at his son, and he hugged his father. Taking the grocery bag from her husband, Nora returned to the kitchen. Veronica, John called Oswin. He won't come today. His mother is sick. He went to the hospital with her. So some other time. Well, what can you do? Some other time. Veronica sighed. Her mood immediately soured. So much preparation time and all for nothing. The guests came one after another after Oswin, and soon they were all seated at the large table in the room. Veronica felt a little dizzy after she had drunk several glasses of wine to toast the birthday girl. Why aren't you drinking anything? She asked Christopher, sitting next to her. I'm driving, he answered. How long have you been driving? Without hiding her surprise, she asked. It's been 5 years. Veronica, wake up. I am already 25 years old. Not 12 or 15. With a smile on his face, he said, I know, I know. She took a few more sips of wine. At 18, when she'd last seen him before today's meeting, he'd been very nice too, but still a boy, and now he was a real man who probably had no shortage of girls. The music started to play, and everyone began to get out of the table for a slow dance. Pour some more wine, please, Veronica asked Christopher, looking at her empty glass. He rose from his chair and gave her his hand. Veronica looked at the tight muscles on his arms, and what wide shoulders he had. She could barely resist the urge to run her palm over them. What a pleasure it was for her to feel him holding her tightly by the waist, pulling her slightly closer to his body. She didn't want this dance to end. She could hear the slightly faster beats of his heart, his light breath barely touching her hair. Veronica suddenly shook her head, startled by her thoughts and wanting to banish them from her mind. God, what am I thinking about? She thought suddenly, as if waking up from a reverie. Are you all right? Christopher asked her, seeing her gesture. She looked up and their eyes met. There was something in his gaze that gave her an electric shock, and a shiver ran through her body. Mischievous sparks danced in those gray eyes, staring at her piercingly, and it seemed to Veronica that he understood all her thoughts. Unable to utter a word, Veronica nodded and lowered her head again. Her heart beat harder, and she was afraid that he could hear its frantic beats. But then the music ended, and Veronica hurried to get out of Christopher's strong arms, even though she didn't want to. She sat down at the table again and drained the full glass of wine she had just poured. "You look like you've decided to get drunk tonight," Christopher said, sitting down beside her. He had a sly smile on his lips. "I'm not," Veronica replied, feeling drunk. After all, a sober person could not have such thoughts, which were still running through her head. For the rest of the evening, she did not drink another drop of alcohol. And by the end of the party, Veronica had sobered up, which she was glad of. "Christopher will drive you home," Nora said as Veronica started to get ready to go home. "He'll be living in our former apartment for a while anyway, so you'll be on your way." "That's the last thing we need," Veronica thought. "They'll be neighbors too. You'll just run over there. It's been 2 weeks since I've gotten the berries to you. I've got a freezer full of them so you can have them all." Nora always brought a lot of berries from the countryside and shared them with her friend. Veronica baked excellent pies with them, which were adored by all her friends and relatives. Veronica came downstairs with Christopher. "Have a seat," he said as he opened his car door. "Thank you," she replied, settling into the seat next to the driver. Christopher put on some music and they chatted the whole way, reminiscing about things from the past. Veronica felt awkward around him, confused and inexplicably trembling. "I'll probably pick up some berries later," she said as they pulled up in front of the house. Veronica looked at her watch. It was past 2 o'clock in the morning and it was silent, with only a few of the windows of their house lit, illuminating the darkness. "It won't take long," Christopher said. "Let's go, and I'll help carry it up to the apartment." "All right," Veronica agreed. A few minutes later, they entered the apartment where Veronica had once been a private guest. She looked around and smiled, remembering those times, her and Nora sitting in the kitchen, and the boy who had now grown into such a handsome man. "Come in," Christopher said, taking her lightly around the waist and guiding her into the kitchen. Veronica felt her whole body tingle again at his touch, and tried to pull his hand away. But as soon as she touched his fingers, she was in Christopher's arms in an instant. She was confused, not expecting such a maneuver on his part. Her heart began to pound frantically. She looked into his eyes and felt as if she was speechless for a moment. "What are you doing?" "Let go," she said. It was not just a hurricane, but a hurricane, a tsunami, and an earthquake all at once. No one had ever kissed her like that, and she had not had many men in her life. Veronica didn't think about anything. Her brain was completely shut down. She didn't want him to stop, responding with wild passion to every kiss and touch of Christopher. Veronica woke up and saw that Christopher was still asleep. She was lying on her side with her back to him, and his hand held her tightly to his body. Carefully removing it, she quietly got up. Afraid that he might wake up, and grabbing her things, she began to hurriedly dress as she walked. Like a mouse, she sprinted out of the apartment and ran to the elevator. Her face was burning. Veronica was terribly ashamed. "How could I?" she whispered. "Fool, fool, fool!" When she got outside, she saw Tabitha's car parked in the street, and when she saw her friend, she waved. "Where are you from?" she asked her as she approached Veronica's front door, where she had once lived. "Tabitha, come quickly," Veronica said. "Is someone chasing you? Why are you so disheveled?" Tabitha asked, following her friend into the front room. "No. Why are you here so early?" Veronica looked at her watch. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. "I woke up early and decided to stop by right away to feed my mom's cat." "Are you coming over?" "I will. I hope nothing bad happened to you." "You don't seem like yourself." "Oh, Tabitha. I did something so stupid." Veronica opened the apartment door, inviting her friend in. The women were seated at the table in the kitchen. "Well, I'm all ears." Tabitha looked intently at Veronica. "Let's have a drink," she said. I'm driving and it's 8 in the morning, if only for a coffee. Veronica turned on the coffee maker and sat down at the table opposite her friend. Tabitha, I slept with Christopher, she said, covering her face with her hands. Well, you finally slept with someone. That's great news. Tabitha smiled. Great. Christopher. Nora's son. Veronica took a deep breath and looked at her friend again, her smile fading to a pensive expression. Wow, she said at last. How did it happen? He drove me home. I went to his apartment for berries, and then here. He kissed me, and then everything is like a blur. Did you at least like it? Tabitha smiled again and shook her head, surprised at her friend. Tabitha. Tabitha what? How old is he now? 25. Tabitha whistled. Oh, time flies. He's a grown man. Did you take the berries? Are you kidding me? I feel like a pervert now. He was 12 when Nora and I met. I remember going for walks with Nora, Alice, and Christopher, going to their cottage. He was always my friend's child to me. I can see Christopher right in front of my eyes. When he was that boy, well, he's a boy now. You're a woman, he's a man, and there's nothing so outrageous about what happened. How am I going to look Nora in the eye now? Veronica's cheeks were burning. Well, you didn't rape him. You both did your own free will. That doesn't make it any easier. Veronica sighed heavily. So there was a hurricane. Tabitha smiled again. There was an apocalypse. Tabitha, I've never had one of those before. Remembering that night, Veronica felt goosebumps run all over her body again. Listen, it was fine and good. Don't beat yourself up like that. There's no going back. It was a huge mistake. And now he's going to live in the next-door neighbor's apartment. I just don't get it. Where's John? He couldn't make it. Oh, well, maybe he's not needed anymore. Tabitha laughed a little. It's not funny. What am I supposed to do now? Don't do anything. Don't be so hard on yourself. I'm ashamed of myself, and I want to go to hell. And the worst part is that I can't stop seeing that night and getting goosebumps. What if you and him could work out? You're crazy. Veronica looked at her friend in amazement. 8 is not 28, and you look much younger. I don't care. It was a huge mistake, and it won't happen again. I can't wait to meet John. See for yourself. Veronica, don't worry so much. Christopher's not going to tell Nora he slept with you. You haven't had a boyfriend in 3 years, and now you're with a young, handsome man, so you're going for it. You had fun, and that's good. If he wasn't your friend's son, you wouldn't be reacting this way. I'm going to go feed the cat, and I have other things to do. Tabitha patted her friend on the shoulder and headed for the door. After Tabitha left, Veronica lay down on the bed. She couldn't get the night and thoughts of Christopher out of her head. And what scared her the most was that she wanted to do it all over again. After a while, Veronica dozed off, but not for long. She was awakened by the doorbell. Her heart pounded frantically in her chest. She was sure it was Christopher. She went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was him. After gathering her thoughts, Veronica decided to open the door, because hiding was stupid, and it was better to explain now than to postpone it until later. Hi, Christopher said, entering the apartment. He was holding a large bag. You forgot the berries. He put the bag on the floor. Why'd you run away? A smile played on his lips. He took a step forward, and Veronica immediately drew back. She didn't run away. She left. Christopher, we made a big mistake, but it won't happen again. I was drunk. Let's just forget the whole thing like it never happened, she said in a serious tone. A mistake. And you weren't drunk. He took a few steps forward, and before she knew it, Veronica was pinned against the wall by his body. We're adults, he said, staring intently into her eyes, and she saw in them the same desire she'd seen last night. And I don't think it's a mistake. I want you, and you want me. So why give up what we both want? I don't want you, she lied, and I don't want any of that. Before she could finish, Christopher's lips were against hers, and Veronica was once again disconnected from reality, completely at the mercy of the passion that had taken hold of her again, even more powerfully than the night before. Veronica could feel Christopher's heart pounding frantically, and her heart was literally leaping out of her chest. He nuzzled his nose into her hair, still clutching her tightly in his arms, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her cheek against his sweat, damp chest. Both of them were breathing heavily and intermittently, with him and in the hallway against the wall in my own apartment. I've definitely lost my mind, Veronica thought, and immediately pulled away from Christopher. He smiled and kissed her lightly on the lips. "Will you let me take a shower?" he asked in a whisper. Veronica nodded, and he took her hand and headed there with her. She couldn't take her eyes off his naked body, admiring the trickles of water running down his back, over the muscles bulging on his arms, and she could hardly suppress the urge to touch him again. "We need to do this again," Christopher said, winking at Veronica. "I mean, what we just did in the hallway." "You don't need to repeat anything," she answered immediately. "Don't come back. And if I do, won't you let me in?" He raised an eyebrow in surprise. "I won't." "Dry yourself and go. There's a towel in the pencil case." He came out of the bathtub and, taking out a towel, began to dry himself. And Veronica immediately pulled the curtain all the way down so that she couldn't see him, and he couldn't look at her. "Give me the towel, the big purple one," she asked Christopher. "Why did you hide?" "I've already seen all of your charms." He laughed a little as he handed her the towel. Veronica began to dry herself in the bathroom. "Does it bother you that much that I'm your friend's son?" he asked suddenly. "Of course it embarrasses me. I've known you since you were 12. Veronica replied, scolding herself again for her weakness. "Don't think about it, because I'm different now. I can't not think about it. We don't need to see each other anymore." Christopher held out his hand to her. "Come on, get out." Veronica struggled to climb out of the tub, wrapped in a towel from head to toe. "You loved it. Don't deny it," he said. "Why do you have to complicate your life with stupid prejudices?" Veronica looked at him unhappily and headed out into the hallway. She wanted Christopher to leave her apartment quickly. "Please get dressed and leave," she said to him. "Kindergarten, Veronica." "No offense." He sighed, pulling on his jeans. "Think what you want. I don't care." When Christopher was fully dressed, he put his arms around Veronica again, and she started to resist. "Do you understand or don't you?" She was almost screaming. "I don't want this." But as if not hearing her, he kissed her lips again, and her resistance quickly ceased. "You see," he whispered, touching his forehead to hers. "You want to." "No," she whispered back, and he kissed her once more. "And now?" "Christopher, please stop," she literally begged. "I have things to do and I have to run, but I'll be there tonight." Without releasing Veronica from his embrace, he said, "I have things to do too, and I'm leaving tonight," she lied. "Where are you going?" "On a date. Let me go." Christopher opened his arms and Veronica immediately pulled away from him. Without another word, he left her apartment. Veronica went to the window. She saw him leave the front door and head toward his car, which left the courtyard a few minutes later. Sighing, she headed into the kitchen and turned on kettle. Just then, her phone rang. "Hi. Did you pick up the berries?" her friend asked. "Yes, thank you," she replied, blushing. "Next time you come to visit us, you owe me your specialty pie." "Okay." Veronica answered, even though she didn't want to go to Nora's anymore. She couldn't imagine how she would look her in the eye. "Christopher should go to look at an apartment today," Nora continued. "We'll sell the one in your building. He wants a bigger apartment in a new building. My son is definitely getting married." "Oh, Veronica, I'm so glad he moved back to New York. And when he's going to show you the bride, he still hasn't told you?" Veronica asked. She suddenly remembered that Alice had talked about it at her mother's birthday party, and she felt even more uncomfortable. "Not yet." After talking with Nora for a while longer, Veronica poured herself some tea, but before she could take a couple of sips, her phone rang again. This time it was Tabitha. "How's it going?" "Have you come to your senses?" she asked Veronica. "I wish," she sighed. Christopher didn't show up after your wild night. He did. He brought berries. Oh, and we had it all over again, Veronica said with a sigh, and then she heard laughter on the phone. I'm not laughing at all. I'm sorry. You said it was a mistake, that there was no more. It's only been a few hours, and you've managed to get back together with him. I kicked him out and told him not to come back. He wanted to come back tonight. Maybe he shouldn't have. Let him come, Tabitha said, still laughing. It's not a waste. And stop laughing at me. Oh, I can't. You want my advice? What's that? Relax and just live. Do what you want to do and don't worry about it. Are you saying we should continue this thing with Christopher? Why not, if that's what you want? Get out of the habit of cutting things off at the drop of a hat. Thanks for the advice. I'm gonna go get some breakfast because this is usually lunchtime, and I haven't eaten anything yet. Bon appetite. I'll see you later. After having a snack, Veronica lay down and fell asleep and woke up only at 8 o'clock in the evening. She got out of bed and went to the window. Christopher's car was already parked in the yard in the same place where he had left her today. After preparing a light dinner, Veronica sat on the couch and turned on the television. She kept thinking about Christopher and what had happened between them, remembering his every touch and kiss. She looked at the clock and suddenly realized that she was waiting for him to come. She wanted him to come, even though she was ashamed to admit it to herself. When the hands of the clock struck midnight, Veronica realized that Christopher was definitely not coming, and it made her sad. She began to regret lying to him about the date. But then her mind screamed that she had done everything right and would not let her passions override her common sense. Veronica opened Nora's contact page and searched for Christopher's friends. There weren't many pictures of him, but almost all of them were at events where there were a lot of people. It was hard to tell whether he had a girlfriend or not. At work, she was busy, and Veronica finally managed to distract herself from unwanted thoughts about Christopher. When the workday was over, she ran to the store and hurried home. Before entering the front door, she glanced at the spot where his car had been parked yesterday. It wasn't there. You don't care. You have to forget everything, she said to herself, and hurried home. Having prepared dinner, she sat in front of the TV, turning on another melodrama. When the doorbell rang, Veronica froze and her heart began to pace again. Getting up from the couch, she went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Christopher. As she was about to turn the lock to open the door, she pulled her hand away from him, as if she'd just realized it. No, she said to herself, pulling herself together and leaned back against the door. The doorbell rang a second and third time, but Veronica was determined not to open it, because otherwise everything would happen again, and she didn't want that. Every evening until the weekend, Veronica sat at the window for hours, waiting for Christopher's car to appear on the horizon. And every time she waited with bated breath for him to get out of it, sighing with relief when she saw that he had arrived alone. Nora called on Thursday and invited her friend to visit, asking her to bring her a special pie, because she was finally going to meet John. Despite the fact that she was terribly ashamed in front of her friend, she still agreed, because this meeting could change her life. Veronica really wanted to believe that John was the one for her. Yummy, Nora took the pie from her friend and kissed it eek. John is already here, she whispered. The pie needs to warm up a little, so it will taste better, Veronica replied. Well, we're not going to drink tea yet. Let's go and get acquainted. Nora put the pie on the kitchen table and led her friend into the room where Oswin and John were talking animatedly about something. Veronica's here. This is John. The man turned his head and then rose from his seat and approached the women. Nice to meet you, he said, smiling good-naturedly. Nice to meet you, too, Veronica replied, smiling back. Well, please come to the table, Nora said to the guests. The atmosphere was easy and relaxed. They talked about different topics, and John was a good conversationalist, not lacking a sense of humor. He was not as striking as Christopher, of course, but rather a plain but pleasant man. He was unmarried at 35, and as Oswin had said, he was in active search of his soulmate. I'm going to warm the cake, Nora said, when they had all decided it was time for tea. and in a few minutes the whole air in the apartment was saturated with the aroma of baked goods and berries. "Mom, what an aroma," Oswin and John said almost in unison. "And what a flavor." "Veronica used to spoil us with her baked goods," Nora said, putting her friend's culinary creation on the table. No sooner had she cut the pie into pieces than the doorbell rang, and the woman handed the knife to her husband and went to open it. "Hello, son," she said to Christopher, who entered the apartment, and kissed him on the cheek. "Mommy, have you prepared the documents?" "And what smells so good?" he asked, smiling at his mother. "I did. Come in. You must be hungry from work. We were just about to have tea. Do you have guests?" "Yes. Come on." Veronica felt the color rush to her cheeks. She wanted to fall through the floor when Christopher came into the room. She had never imagined he would be here tonight. "Good evening," he said, sitting down at the table and yawning. He looked very tired. "She went to the club with her friends," Nora said, pouring tea for her son. "Hello," Christopher, Oswin said, and introduced his colleague to his son. Sitting down opposite Veronica, Christopher put a piece of cake on his plate. "Did you bake it?" he asked her, remembering well how she had often spoiled their family with them. Veronica felt herself blush even more when Christopher squinted at her. His gaze was unkind, and she felt like lightning was about to fly from his eyes. "Yes," she answered, trying to keep her heart from racing. She wanted to crawl under the table and hide from those berries. He smiled cynically as he continued to stare at her, and Veronica barely kept her composure. From them, she lowered her eyes, unable to bear the stare any longer. "I love your pies." He took a bite of the pie and closed his eyes in pleasure for a moment. "Mama, delicious." To Veronica's delight, Christopher finished his tea and left, giving her one last angry glance. When she saw him again today, the memories came flooding back to her, and the images of the mad passion with which they had given themselves to each other not so long ago came back to her. It was with great difficulty that Veronica was able to change her mind and continue her casual conversation with her new acquaintance. "Oh," Christopher forgot the documents he'd come for. Nora gasped when she saw the folder in the hallway. "Veronica, drop by and tell him. He needs them tomorrow." Not this, Veronica thought. "Maybe he'll pick them up himself tomorrow," she asked her friend, not wanting to take the folder. "You live in the same house." It would take 5 minutes, Nora insisted, and Veronica reluctantly took the documents. John told Veronica funny stories on the way, but she didn't listen to him, thinking only of the fact that she was going to see Christopher again. "Shall we go out tomorrow?" John asked her, pulling up outside her house. She had arranged to meet a friend tomorrow, Veronica said. She and Tabitha were really going to go for a walk in the park and to a cafe. "Maybe during the week, then." "With pleasure," she replied, rewarding the man with a smile. "Where would you like to go?" he asked her. Veronica shrugged her shoulders. "All right, then. The choice is mine." John got out of the car and, opening the door, gave her his hand. "See you later," he said, not letting her hand out of his. "See you later." Veronica carefully released his hand and headed toward the front door where Christopher lived. She stood at the intercom for several minutes, hesitant to dial Christopher's apartment number. When a man with a dog came out of the front door, she immediately ducked inside. Once at the door, she breathed in and out, reassuring herself that nothing would happen between them this time. Christopher didn't answer the door right away, but when he did, she saw him. When he did, Veronica realized that she had woken him up with her midnight visit. He looked at Veronica in surprise and yawned, and her throat went dry at the sight of his half-naked torso. "You forgot your papers," she said in a slightly husky voice, holding out the folder to him. "Right," he said. "Come on in." He invited Veronica to come into the apartment. "Just take the documents and I'll go," she said, continuing to hold out the folder, which he immediately took. "You're acting like a child," he said with a sigh. "Don't you think it's silly to run and hide from me?" "I'm not running and hiding," she said as she crossed the threshold. "I've already told you everything. Come into the kitchen. Let's just talk." "Just don't touch me," she said immediately. Are you afraid that again you will not be able to resist? He grinned slightly, not touching Veronica with a finger. What an ego you have, she grinned back and went into the kitchen and sat down at the table. Christopher sat across from her, staring at her intently, as if studying her. Didn't your date go so well that my parents decided to introduce you to this John today? He asked. That's none of your business, she answered sharply. Why do you want him? Christopher asked, not taking his eyes off her. I shouldn't have come in. Veronica got up from her chair and was about to leave, but Christopher blocked her way. Let me through, she said. I don't understand you. Why are you pushing me away? This isn't the Stone Age. You want me as much as I want you. Veronica took a step back. This isn't right. There's nothing more between us. I just want to leave. Let me through, please, she almost begged. Christopher stepped closer and Veronica pressed herself against the wall. You promised we'd just talk, she whispered. We are talking, he replied, standing literally a few centimeters away from her. It's not like I'm touching you. Veronica stared into his eyes, her heart jumping out of her chest again, the ground slipping away from under her feet and her head spinning. More than anything, she wanted to be in his arms again, to surrender to the passion that was burning her. I want you, Christopher whispered, leaning his head toward her ear, his cheek lightly touching hers. Veronica felt her whole body tingle again. He looked at her again, though, and his lips were so close. Veronica closed her eyes, expecting him to kiss her now, but it didn't happen. When she opened her eyes again, he was still looking at her. Do you still want to leave? He asked. Yes, barely audibly, she whispered. Liar, Christopher smiled slightly and stepped away from her. Veronica realized she couldn't take a step, continuing to stand against the wall. Oh, I'm not holding you, he said. She plopped down on the nearest chair and took a few breaths. Christopher walked over and held out his hand to her. Need a hand? He asked. She put her hand in his and rose from the chair, but her legs felt as if they wouldn't obey her, and she stood there, unable to move. So you still want to go? He asked again, looking into her eyes. No, she whispered, forgetting she'd given herself a promise to resist him this time. A smile lit up Christopher's face. He took both her hands and placed them on his chest, his own arms around her waist. What am I doing? Veronica asked herself that question. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her whole body against him, still looking into his eyes and frantically wanting to repeat what had happened between them. Not so long ago. Nothing wrong, he replied, finally tilting his head for a kiss, and Veronica was the first to touch his lips, experiencing incredible bliss and dissolving into these feelings that completely consumed her. Veronica woke up with a smile on her face and stretched. She opened her eyes, but Christopher wasn't there, and just a minute later, she heard the key turn and the front door swing open. She got dressed and left the room, catching the scent of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen. When she saw Veronica, Christopher came over to her and kissed her on the lips. Good morning. Do you want coffee? He asked. Yes. Thank you, she replied discreetly. I went to the store while you slept. He set a box of bushels in front of her. Your favorite. Veronica was surprised. It had been so many years, and he remembered what kind of cakes she liked. Thank you. She smiled slightly. What are your plans for today? Christopher asked. I'm going out with Tabitha, and tonight I have to cook something. My mom's coming back tomorrow. From where? Egypt. She and my mom are vacationing there. Mum. When you're free, do you have time for me? Christopher. What's all this for? Veronica sighed heavily. She suddenly felt disgusted at herself for doing this to her friend again, and she was afraid to imagine what would happen to her if she found out that Veronica was sleeping with her son. And she also realized that he wouldn't give her what she wanted. Family, children, confidence in the future, because that's what we both want. He answered, pouring her coffee. I want a serious relationship, a family, children. I'm not 20 years old to waste time. Smile disappeared from Christopher's face. So you're wasting your time with me? You know what I mean. Veronica, what makes you think I don't want all the same things? At your age, you usually only want what we did last night. Thank you for the coffee and for the pastries. Veronica got up from his chair. I'm gonna go. Wait. If you think that's all I want, you're wrong. What do you need? She looked at him in surprise. The same thing you need. Veronica laughed nervously. What's so funny about that? Christopher was very unhappy to see such a reaction to his words. I imagined Nora and Oswin's faces when you told them you wanted a relationship with me. I don't have to ask anyone's permission or approval, especially since I have normal parents. You know, you can't get far on passion alone. Veronica sighed. You have too much on your mind, and it prevents you from seeing the obvious, he sighed. Relax and try to live with your feelings. Christopher, I can't do that. There are too many buts. Buts that you've made up for yourself. Why don't we go somewhere together sometime, someplace you want to go? Anywhere you say. I just don't have a lot of time right now. I have a lot of work. Sometimes I get home at midnight. I don't know. She hesitated. Christopher came up to her and kissed her. Please don't get loaded, he said. But Veronica loaded up big time, confused by what she was hearing. I'll go, she said. Good. I'll wait for you tonight. He kissed her again before she left. Christopher could see that she was confused and metabitic, and her pensive look told him that she was always thinking hard. All he had to do was trust his feelings and do what he wanted, especially if they both wanted the same thing. Tabitha wasn't there yet, and Veronica sat down on a park bench. She leaned her head back and put her hand to her forehead. Christopher hadn't left her thoughts for a moment. Why are you sitting there like that? Tabitha asked, who Veronica hadn't even noticed, immersed in her own thoughts and memories. I'm waiting for you, she said, and got up from the bench. So tell me, how are you doing? Have you sorted out your passions? They walked leisurely down the path. Only Veronica sighed. I was at Christopher's again that night. Tabitha laughed out loud. Oh, I can't get enough of you, she said with difficulty. Told the mistake and again. And how many times do you plan on being so wrong? I want to finish this and I will, Veronica said confidently. Weighing all the pros and cons, she still made this decision. Oh, did she? Tabitha couldn't stop laughing. John invited her to go out with him. It's a cakewalk. I hope it does. Christopher and I can't get anything but hot nights together. I need a serious man and a serious relationship. I don't want to end up chasing two birds and catching none of them. And what makes you think Christopher's not serious? He's an arrogant boy. He's not serious. Alice said he came back here for a girl and he's cheating on that girl with me. He says he wants a relationship too. He wants a family too. Well, I don't see any girl but you. I think he has no one else. I don't think it's going to work out with John, but it might with Christopher. Tabitha smiled at her thoughtful friend. Yeah, until he finds someone younger. I know the type. My ex, Veronica sighed heavily, remembering her ex-husband. We were the same age when I married him, and after a year he started to go for women. I'd rather be older, and certainly not my friend's son. Well, not everyone's a jerk like him. Even at 40, they're running around from their wives. It doesn't depend on age, and all your problems from the fact that too much you think everything over, digging into everything instead of just enjoying life. It doesn't matter whose son he is, because I can see you care about him. I don't want to do anything stupid. When you're 20, you don't think about anything. You look at everything through rose-colored glasses. You're guided by feelings. That's it. Let's talk about you. Well, I'm not as interesting as you, Tabitha said. I'm curious. How is it with Jacob and your son? Tabitha started talking about her husband and son, but it didn't help Veronica get her mind off Christopher. When she got home, Veronica cooked for her mother's arrival. It was 10 o'clock in the evening when she got home. She looked out the window. Christopher's car was parked outside his front door. No, I'm not going, she said to herself and turned on the TV, settling down on the couch. After sitting like that for about 15 minutes, she got up off the couch and walked down the hallway. And after another 7 minutes, her fingers pressed Christopher's apartment number on the intercom of the neighboring front door. When Veronica got to the floor, Christopher was standing by the elevators, leaning against the wall and crossing his arms over his chest. "I knew you'd come," Christopher said with a smile, pulling her to him. "How cocky you are," she said. "Yes, I am," he said, drawing Veronica into his apartment. "I decided to do some work at home," he said, and walked over to his laptop. "Just a couple minutes and I'm all yours." Veronica sat down on the couch. "That's it." Closing the laptop, he settled down next to Veronica. "You hungry?" "No, I already ate dinner." "Why don't we watch a movie?" "I could watch a movie." "What kind of movie?" "A comedy," she answered. Christopher turned on a suitable movie. "Do you want ice cream?" he asked Veronica. "I will," she replied. Christopher went into the kitchen, and after a minute he handed Veronica a sugar pipe and immediately printed it out. "Here you go. It's your favorite." "Thank you." Veronica was once again surprised that he remembered such little things. Throughout the movie, Veronica couldn't figure out why Christopher still wasn't hitting on her. They sat leaning against the back of the couch as he continued to lightly put his arm around her. They watched the movie casually, talking more about neutral topics. Christopher talked about his life in Washington, about his work. They recalled moments from the past, and Veronica suddenly realized that she no longer saw him as that 12-year-old boy, seeing him only as a man who evoked so many feelings at once that she couldn't define them properly. "I have to get up early," Christopher said. It was after 1 o'clock in the morning. "You have to work tomorrow, too. I suggest we go to bed." He gave her his hand, and together they went to the bedroom. He kissed her lightly on the lips and said, "Good night," and clasping Veronica in his arms, he closed his eyes. He was really going to sleep. "Good night," Veronica replied, surprised. She snuggled into his arms and closed her eyes too, catching herself that she wasn't disappointed that they hadn't had their violent passion this evening. She felt good just having him around. In his arms, she felt like she was in a cabin, protected from any bad weather. In the morning, Christopher made breakfast and then drove Veronica to work. "Will I see you tonight?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Veronica answered, suppressing the word yes. That almost rolled off her tongue. The smile had been on her lips all day. She felt so good, even at night, when she just slept on his chest, when he made breakfast for her, because no man had ever done that before. Veronica had just gotten off work when John called her. "Hi, so about the promised date?" he asked. Veronica had completely forgotten that she had promised John to go out with him tomorrow at 6. She answered, and it was as if she'd woken up from her reverie, coming back to reality, remembering that John was much better suited to her than Christopher, and she needed to go out with him. "Great. I'll pick you up at 6 tomorrow. Give me the address." Veronica dictated her work address. As agreed, John picked her up at 6 and took Veronica to the nearest restaurant for dinner. They sat there for a couple of hours, talking about various topics, and she enjoyed talking to John. Her heart was beating smoothly. It was calm. No passions were raging in her soul. "What are your plans for the weekend?" he asked her. "I don't know yet," she answered. "Why don't we get together, go to some cultural event? I'd like to go to Devo Island." Veronica suddenly remembered that she'd wanted to go on a merry-go round for a long time. John wrinkled his nose a little and then smiled again. "Veronica, those are children's fun, and we're adults. I wanted to invite you to an exhibition that's happening this weekend. A very talented artist is exhibiting. You'll love it. And then we can take a boat trip on the Neva, and then a restaurant. How do you like this option?" Veronica was certainly not a connoisseur of art, but the fact that John invited her to the exhibition, she liked it because it characterized him as an intelligent man, involved in culture, and not devoid of romance, because he wanted to take a boat ride. "All right." "Saturday," Veronica replied, because Christopher had to work on Saturday. John drove her home, and Veronica thought about the kind of man she needed for her family, her mind telling her over and over again. John hadn't even tried to hit on her. He hadn't even tried to hit on her. He hadn't taken her to bed since they'd first met, which told her that he was serious. When she got out of his car, she saw that Christopher's car wasn't there yet. Good thing, she thought, because she wasn't going to go to his place, trying to think about John. After chatting with her mom for a while, she went to her room. And then the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but Veronica answered. "Hi, I'm home already. Are you coming over?" Christopher asked, and when Veronica heard his voice, she felt a flutter inside her and her heart pounded harder. He must have gotten her phone number from Nora somehow, she thought. "I'll be there," she thought, and she started to get ready. "Where are you going at night?" her mom asked her. "To a friend. I'll stay at her place tonight." Veronica lied and jumped out of the apartment. "To a friend's house," her mother said when her daughter was gone. Christopher was waiting for her again at the elevator and immediately wrapped his arms around her as soon as she approached him. "I missed you," he said, and kissed her several times on the lips. They walked into the apartment, and Christopher immediately hugged her again. "I haven't had a chance to shower yet." "Why don't you keep me company?" He was smiling, and the fire of desire was burning in his eyes again. And Veronica's heart sank at the sight of it, because her soul was burning with the same flame that her mind couldn't put out. "I haven't been in the shower yet," she said, smiling. Water trickled down their naked bodies, his hands gently caressing her heated body, his lips still on hers. Veronica felt as if her heart couldn't take the overflow of feelings, which again came over her with more force than before. She thought, "Oh, God," she whispered, pressing her body against him, breathing heavily. Veronica couldn't imagine how she would be able to give up this crazy passion, and she realized that she was unlikely to desire another man in the same way someday. "How about we go out on Sunday?" Christopher asked, and kissed Veronica gently on the shoulder as she lay next to him. "Why don't we go to Devo Island?" she asked. "Great, let's do it. I haven't been on a merry go-round in ages." Veronica stretched and rested her head on his chest. She didn't want to get up, but it was time to get out of bed. Christopher drove her to work. "Until tonight?" he asked. "Until tonight," replied Veronica, who was looking forward to it. Christopher arrived late, so they had dinner at his place and talked for a while, and then went to bed with just a kiss. And Veronica loved that they had nights like that. And on Saturday, John came to pick Veronica up, and they went to the exhibition, which did not impress her at all. And Veronica wanted to leave quickly, but John insisted that she had to see all the paintings, and she followed him, hoping that there were not so many of them left. But the boat ride Veronica enjoyed, as did the dinner at the restaurant. "Shall we go to my place?" John asked when they left the restaurant and looked at Veronica, hoping to hear a positive answer. "I'm not ready yet," she answered, a little embarrassed. Veronica looked at John and thought, weighing the pros and cons again. She liked talking to him, and she liked talking to him, and she liked the calmness of being around him too. He seemed trustworthy, and with him, she thought she would be sure of the future, unlike Christopher. "I'm sorry to rush things, but I really like you. Veronica, my intentions are serious, not casual, and I hope to have a relationship with you." "I need a little more time," she replied. "Please don't rush me. I can't go that fast." "Okay," the man agreed, sighing. "When will I see you now? Let's do it around the middle of the week." Veronica realized she was delaying the moment, but her mind was screaming again. "Come on, make up your mind. It's so soon. I'd like to see you again sooner. Like tomorrow." "I can't tomorrow. Let's do Monday then." Without going into details, she replied. "Until Monday then." John kissed her hand goodbye. When she got home, Veronica thought about the previous day, about how John was quite a nice man. She felt that he was the kind of quiet and peaceful harbor suitable for family life. On Sunday morning, Veronica went with Christopher to Krestovsky Island. It was wonderful to feel somewhat like a child again, riding on all sorts of merry go-rounds. She laughed incessantly, enjoying life. It was easy and good for her. "Do you want cotton candy?" Christopher asked Veronica. "Yes," she replied, trying to remember the last time she had had cotton candy. Christopher hurried to the kiosk where they sold it. Here, he held out a huge, multicolored sugar ball on a stick to Veronica, and she took bite after bite of it with great pleasure. "You're all messed up," Christopher said, laughing. He took a pack of wet wipes out of his pocket and gently began to wipe the cotton candy residue from her face. Veronica looked at him and realized she had never felt as good with anyone as she did with this man. "Shall we go for a boat ride?" he asked her when he finished wiping the last bit of cotton candy stuck to her cheek. "Sure," she agreed, and holding hands, they headed toward the dock. It was a wonderful day. Veronica even thought it was the best day of her life. Grabbing a pizza on the way, they arrived at his place in the evening. Veronica felt so happy, and she didn't want the day to end. "I'm moving out of here in a couple weeks," Christopher said as they sat at his house eating pizza. "To a new apartment?" she asked. "Yes. It's almost ready." He looked at Veronica seriously. "Will you come with me?" he asked. And Veronica almost choked when she heard such a question. "Are you suggesting that I move in with you?" she asked. "Yes, I'd like that very much." "Christopher, I told you I want something different, not just living together. And your parents." Veronica replied seriously, "I remember." Christopher smiled and took another bite of pizza. "We'll be fine. Just trust me. I promise you won't regret it." "I don't know." Veronica sighed heavily. "Just say yes. I promise to think about it," she said, catching herself thinking that she would really like that. She was completely confused, having no idea what she should do. Her heart was screaming, yes, 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 while her mind kept saying no. Monday after work, she did meet up with John. They walked around the park for a while and had dinner at a nearby cafe. It was the same for Wednesday. "Veronica, I can't take it anymore," John said. "If you don't like me, just say so." "Friday," she suddenly replied before leaving him. She had finally made up her mind. Maybe after being intimate with John, she would finally get rid of this incredible attraction to Christopher. Lately, their relationship had been going too far. It was scaring Veronica. She was thinking about his parents again. She was unsure of her future with him again. John was looking forward to Friday. He even asked to leave work a little early to get everything ready. Then he went to pick up Veronica afterward. "Please," he escorted Veronica into the room where a small table was set up with lighted candles on it, adding romance to the ambience around it. Veronica was feeling tense. She took a seat at the table and smiled strangely at John, who began pouring wine into her glass. Seeing her tension, John decided not to rush things, but sat down across from her, trying to entertain her with conversation. She looked at him and shook her head, as if she wanted to wake up from the dream she'd been in when she'd agreed to come here. "What am I doing here?" she asked herself in her mind. All she could see was Christopher. Veronica suddenly remembered their trip to the Devo Island, those nights when they just slept in each other's arms. How he'd made her breakfast in the morning, how he'd scrubbed cotton candy off her face. After all, she was happy with him, not only when they were in a frenzy of passion, but always when he was just there for her. And now she wanted to be with him, not here or with John. The calm she felt around him was nothing but indifference. "John?" Veronica suddenly interrupted the man sitting across from her. "I'm sorry, but you and I are not going to work out." John's face changed, looking at Veronica, who immediately got up from the table and headed for the front door. "And why do you suddenly decide that now, may I ask?" he asked. "I love someone else." Veronica answered, not understanding how she hadn't realized it before. For some reason, it had become so obvious to her only now. "Open the door, please," and apologize again. John laughed. "What?" he asked through his laughter. "Why did you have to lead me on for so long and drag me here?" "I'm sorry. I'm just confused about myself." John got up from the table and walked to the front door, where Veronica was standing. When he opened the door, he looked angrily at the woman who had stood him up. "Another would have been in my place for such a..." He didn't finish, and Veronica quickly jumped out of John's apartment. "Get out of here, you fool," she heard one last time. Veronica exhaled as she made her way downstairs. She hailed a cab and called Christopher, but the caller was out of range. Christopher had promised his mother that he and his father would stop by for dinner after work. He wanted to tell them about Veronica, about his feelings for her that had never really gone away over the years. In the 7 years since they'd seen each other, his pain and passions had certainly subsided. There had been women in his life, but none of them had managed to take her place in his heart. Perhaps he was a one-woman man like his father, who had loved only his mother all his life. Christopher decided to return to New York, from which he had fled to Washington 7 years before. Realizing that at 18 he had absolutely no chance of reciprocation from her, because Veronica did not even notice how much he loved her. Then she was about to get married, and he had run away to another city, away from her, wanting to forget. Now that he was an adult and an independent man, he finally had a chance to win the woman he had loved all his life. When he had seen Veronica at his mother's birthday party, his feelings had sharpened with renewed vigor, and he had also noticed her interest in him. And when they were alone together, he just couldn't keep those feelings under control any longer. And now, she wanted him as much as he wanted her. All that remained was to win her love, and Christopher was sure he would. Tomorrow he was going to buy a ring and propose to Veronica, as well as to confess his feelings, because Veronica persistently did not want to see them. "Christopher, how are things at work? Why are you always working late? You work on Saturdays too?" asked Nora, her son, appetizing her cutlets with fried potatoes. "For now. We just opened recently. We need to get everything in order. Then it will be easier, Mom," he replied, smiling. "And how are things with the mystery bride?" Nora smiled. "More on that later." Christopher winked at his mother, smiling enigmatically. Intrigued. "I can see you look happy, and that's the most important thing." Nora looked affectionately at her son and sighed. "I wish Veronica and John would work things out, and I hope she'd be happy too." Christopher looked at his mother in surprise. "Are they dating?" he asked, and the smile dropped right off his face. "Yes, they've gone out a few times," replied that one. "LaRousse, do not worry about your friend," said Oswin, and looked at his watch. "I think at the moment they have everything is just about to come together." Well, 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 can you elaborate?" Nora looked at her husband curiously. "Didn't she tell you? You women like to discuss such things?" "She didn't tell me anything. Just tell me." So John picked her up from work today and took her to his place. Romance and all that. You know the drill. Finally, Nora exhaled. "That's great news." "That's it," Christopher thought, and squeezed the juice glass he was holding with all his might, not even noticing when it cracked and many shards embedded themselves in his palm and fingers. "Oh my God," Nora exclaimed, seeing the blood dripping onto the table and onto her son's shattered glass. "Christopher, how did you do that?" asked the father. "Oswin, bring peroxide and absorbent cotton quickly." Christopher unclenched his hand and smiled at his mother. "I don't know how it happened," he said. "Can I stay with you tonight?" "Of course." "I'll make a bed for you in the living room." Nora took his hand and began gently rubbing it with peroxide, pulling out the shards of glass embedded in his fingers. When his mother finished and removed the last piece, bandaging his hand, Christopher went to bed. He turned on his side and closed his eyes. The pain in his arm was nothing compared to the pain that now plagued his heart. All his hopes had been dashed in a few minutes of talking to his parents. Christopher's car was gone, but Veronica knew he would be late for work today. She dialed his number one more time, but the caller was out of range again. Veronica went home, deciding that tomorrow she would tell him of her decision to move in with him. And Nora was not a wild animal after all, and maybe she could understand her friend. Suddenly she didn't care about anything else. All that mattered was that she loved Christopher and wanted to be with him. The next day she dialed Christopher's number again, but it was still turned off or out of range. Veronica looked out the window, and what was her surprise when she saw him outside his car? Christopher was putting some boxes in the trunk. Veronica quickly jumped out of the apartment and headed toward him, a happy smile playing on her face. "Hi. What kind of boxes?" she asked, continuing to glow with happiness. "I called you, but your phone is off." "Hi," he replied dryly, not even turning around and continuing to put those boxes in the trunk. "I'm moving, and my phone's dead. Christopher, is something wrong?" Veronica asked worriedly, not understanding why he was talking to her like that, and the smile immediately dropped from her face. Nothing happened. As he put the last box in the trunk, he turned to face Veronica, and she immediately noticed that his gaze was aloof. "Christopher, you asked me to think about moving." "I'm willing to move in with you," she said. Christopher sighed. "And I don't need it anymore," he replied indifferently. Veronica felt a lump come up to her throat. A terrible panic seized her inside, the fear of losing him completely gripping her soul. She was still looking into his eyes and saw only indifference, as if he was someone she didn't know, because Christopher looked at her in a completely different way. "I don't understand," she barely said, trying to keep from crying. "Listen, Veronica," he said calmly. "I loved you very much. I really did. But you didn't want to see it. You didn't want to see it. You didn't need to. I've had enough. I'm not a boy to run after you all the time to persuade you and prove something. You said you wanted a serious relationship, but you only wanted me for sex. The rest you looked elsewhere, not wanting to take it from me. I don't want anything else. I gotta go." Christopher closed the trunk. Veronica was dumbfounded. Everything inside of her shattered. She was in maddening pain. She couldn't and wouldn't believe those words. "Is it over between us?" she barely whispered, unable to hold back her tears. "It was," he answered, getting behind the wheel of his car. Tears rolled down Veronica's cheeks. She came home and fell on the bed and burst into tears. His words echoed in her head over and over again, and she refused to believe them. It was now, when she realized she loved him, that he had left her. Was that it? She whispered and cried harder, unwilling to accept such a truth. She realized that Christopher had found out about John and had no idea what she would do to get him back, or if it was even possible to get him back. Veronica lay in bed, flooding with tears. She was glad that her mother had gone away for the weekend, because she didn't want to see anyone. She didn't answer the phone, even though Tabitha and Nora had called her. She would only answer one call, but Christopher didn't call her. Her ears were constantly ringing with her last words, which made her heart tear to pieces. Veronica had no idea what she should do now. When the doorbell rang, she reluctantly crawled out of bed and looked through the peephole. Nora stood on the doorstep. After thinking for a few seconds, she opened the door. "Jesus, Veronica, what's wrong with you?" Nora gasped as she entered her friend's apartment and saw her in tears. "I called you, you don't answer." "What's wrong?" Nora hugged Veronica. "It's John, isn't it? What did he do?" Veronica wiped her tears and blew her nose. "Not because of John," she said in a hoarse voice. "Come into the kitchen. What are you doing here?" "I was just packing up some of the things I had left because Christopher had already moved out, and he was going to bring the stuff I'd packed." As soon as Nora had finished speaking, Veronica burst into tears again. Sitting down next to her friend, Nora hugged her tightly and began to stroke her hair. "Zaya, what are you doing? Come on, calm down and tell me what happened." Veronica raised her red, crying eyes and looked at Nora. "He left me and doesn't love me anymore," she said in a low voice. "John? What does John have to do with this?" Veronica pulled away from her friend, who dumped him. Nora didn't understand anything at all. Veronica went to the sink and rinsed her face and sat down next to her friend again. "The one I love no longer loves me," she answered. "Will you have a drink with me?" Nora agreed, and Veronica took out a bottle of martinis and juice and poured herself and her friend a full glass, emptying her own. "You'd better drink too," she told Nora, and she took a few sips. "Veronica, I don't understand anything." "Come on, tell me. It'll make you feel better." "It won't." Veronica drank another glass. "Nora, you can strangle me. I'll feel worse anyway." She was gathering the courage to confess everything to her friend. "No way. Tell me already." Exhaling, Veronica finally spoke. "Nora, I love your son and we've had sex many times." "We've had sex, we've dated." Nora opened her mouth but couldn't utter a word. Her eyes rounded and her face turned white. After sitting like that for a while, she lifted her glass, spilling its contents onto the table. Her hands trembled, but she drank the rest of the martini in one gulp and immediately poured another. You. Nora drank the second glass in one gulp. Veronica continued to stare at her friend, waiting for the verdict. "So it was you he was after," Nora suddenly gasped. "How could I not see it?" She covered her face with her palms and shook her head. "What about me?" Veronica asked in a whisper, sniffing her nose and not knowing what she was talking about. "I ran away to Washington all of a sudden. You were just getting married to your dog." "Christopher left before the wedding. I wondered why it was such a spontaneous decision." Nora gasped again. "Oh, fuck her. And on Friday this glass. It all makes sense now." "Nora, what was Friday?" Veronica whispered. Nora looked at Veronica, and it seemed to her that her friend was about to jump on her and scratch her eyes out. "How long have you had this?" she asked, raising her tone, leaving her question unanswered. "Since the day you were born." Veronica sipped her martini without diluting it with juice and grimaced. "So you've been seeing my son and going on dates with John." Nora had seen something wrong with Christopher when he'd crushed that glass, but she couldn't imagine that her friend was to blame. Veronica nodded, lowering her eyes. "I've known you for years, but I only found out today that you're such a bitch." Nora downed another glass of martini. "Nora, I love Christopher. I really do. I love him so much. But he didn't love me anymore. And I had nothing with John. She loves him." Nora grinned. "You don't go to romantic dinners with other men when you're in love." "How do you know about dinner?" Veronica gasped. "From the camel. John told Oswin, and he shared it with us on Friday. You." Veronica felt her heart ache again, realizing how Christopher had found out. "With us? Why would you do that to him? You messed with a guy's head and now he's suffering." "I didn't. I thought I could turn my attention to John, and it would be better for everyone. I was afraid you'd hate me if we were together. And now you're not afraid to come clean?" "I'm not afraid because I lost him because of my fears and prejudices. I don't care if you stab me, it won't hurt anymore." Just as Veronica finished, Nora's phone rang. It was Christopher. "Yes, son," she answered. "Mom, I've already loaded everything. Where did you go?" "You can go without me. I'll take a cab later." "What's wrong with your voice? Where are you?" While they were talking, Veronica went to the window. She pulled back the curtain a little and saw Christopher standing by his car in the yard. Tears ran down her cheeks again. "I'm in the middle of something." "Christopher, I'll come back later. Go ahead." "All right." Nora looked at the sobbing Veronica again. "Stop crying," she said, pouring herself and her friend each a martini glass. "Here, drink it." Veronica drank it all down and sighed heavily. "Nora, I feel so bad. What can I do if I love him?" She looked at her friend with pain and longing, and she wished she could understand her. "Let me at least recover from such news," Nora sighed, emptying another glass. Her tongue was already slurring. I can't be without him. Veronica felt dizzy and her eyes blurred. She hadn't eaten anything, only drank. I'm a bad mother, suddenly said Nora, pouring herself another portion of alcohol. Why? Veronica asked her. Because I was blind. He's been in love with you for a long time, and I didn't see it. Nora exhaled and drank again. How long? Veronica emptied her glass immediately. You're a bitch. Nora looked at her friend judgmentally. Veronica burst into tears again. I don't love you anymore either. Nora blurted out and drank some more. Nora, I'm sorry. I love you and I love him. But I'm such a fool. And it's a good thing he left you. We don't need fools. Veronica cried even harder. Don't cry. I can't drink. Nora handed her another full glass. Nora, what am I going to do? Veronica took another drink and put her head down on the table. Nora looked at her friend, shuddering with sobs. Are you asking me? And I'm not talking to you? It's coming on its own. I'm not feeling well. We've had enough, Nora said. I'm going home to digest the info. Info? Anyway, you know what I mean. Nora staggered out into the hallway. Calling a cab, she left her friend. Veronica looked out the window as the cab drove Nora away. She poured herself another martini, even though she was already quite drunk. After a while, she fell asleep at the table. Christopher arrived at his parents' apartment. No one was home. He unloaded the things his mother had packed and was about to leave when Nora appeared on the doorstep. He looked at his mother with surprise and smiled. Wow, Mommy, where did you get so much? Nora plopped down on the chair and, trying to take off her sandals, fell off it. Christopher rushed over to her and lifted her off the floor. Mom has it under control, she said, smiling at her son. I see. Continuing to smile, he took off her sandals himself. Just then the front door swung open, and Oswin and John entered the apartment, in about the same condition as Nora. Christopher looked at his father's colleague with hatred, though was he guilty of anything? No, but he hated the man anyway. Oh, Mother, where did you come from so beautiful? Oswin asked his wife, opening his arms to her. I guess they've already started celebrating the Day of the United States, Christopher said dryly. Hello, son. I'm resuscitating a friend, Oswin said, pointing to the staggering John. Let's go to the kitchen, Kiryov. Oswin took out a bottle of cognac and 2 glasses. Take the third, said Christopher, sitting down with them at the table. He wanted to strangle this John. Son, you don't drink, exclaimed the astonished Nora. Today I do, Christopher replied. Mother, do you want a drink? Oswin asked. I've had enough, said Nora, watching her son. She noticed the hatred he was looking at John. What do these women want? Said John, who until now thoughtfully silent. I do not know, Kiryov, replied Oswin, pouring cognac. He looked at his wife. Your girlfriend is certainly a bitch, he said. That's right, agreed Nora, and the men looked at her in surprise. Christopher drank the brandy and grumbled. It was very hard for him to listen to talk about Veronica, but he didn't show it. I've been going back and forth with her. One date, another. I understand she's a decent woman who doesn't jump into bed right away. John waved his hand and drank all the cognac poured into his glass. When Nora heard him, she grinned nervously. Christopher downed 2 glasses in a row and grimaced. He suddenly felt like he wanted to be full. He hoped it would help dull his pain. What was that all about? Nora suddenly asked John. Didn't your girlfriend tell you? John looked at his friend's wife. We haven't talked for a long time, Nora lied. So I gave her a romantic dinner. Some wine. But I think she's worried. And she goes, I'm sorry, but we're not going to make it. John laughed and shook his head. Nora continued to watch her son. It was obvious that he was barely holding back from lashing out at John. She remembered how 7 years ago, when Christopher had learned that Veronica was getting married, had turned pale and was not himself. But Nora hadn't realized the reason for his sadness and hadn't connected it with her friend. Christopher then hurriedly transferred to study in Washington, and when he came to New York, he avoided seeing Veronica. When he was 15 years old, he had once said that when he grew up, he would marry Veronica. But Nora had not taken it seriously, only laughed at her son. She scolded herself now for being so inattentive to him, not noticing that he had been suffering for years from love for her friend. Oswin patted his friend on the shoulder and poured him more cognac. "Son, you don't drink so much." Nora looked at her son and shook her head. "I'm fine, Ma," he answered, though he wasn't. "Tell me, Christopher," John suddenly turned to his buddy's son. "Have you ever been dumped like that by a woman?" "No," he answered dryly, taking another sip of alcohol. "Son, you at least have a snack." Nora carefully put a plate of sausage and cheese in front of her son. "Oh, you're lucky. So I'm sitting here and I don't understand what's wrong. And she says, 'I'm sorry, I love someone else. I love someone else.'" John laughed nervously. Christopher raised his head and looked at John. "What is she saying?" he asked. Nora noticed the change in her son's look. She loved someone else. "Isn't she stupid? I should have beaten her up so she wouldn't have to throw men away like that." Christopher snapped out of his seat and grabbed John by the pecs, pulling him off the chair. His eyes glittered with anger, and Nora gasped and rushed to her son, as did Oswin. "Christopher, what are you doing?" shouted the astonished father. John tried to resist, though he could barely stand on his feet. "I hope you didn't touch her, or I'll kill you." Christopher gritted his teeth, while Nora stroked his son's back and begged him to let John go. "Get your hands off me. I didn't touch her. I opened the door, and she left." "Why did you get so excited?" John asked snidely as he struggled to free himself, but Christopher released him, and he fell to the floor. Oswin helped John up and sat him in a chair. "What was that just now, son?" "Why are you throwing yourself at people?" He looked at his son, not understanding his overreaction. "Nothing," he replied, drinking a glass of cognac. "Let him watch his language." "Kiryu, you're wrong," immediately said Oswin. "Watch your tongue, Kor," he muttered. "Oh," Nora sighed. "Pour me a cognac, too," she asked her husband. John tried to get up from the chair, but immediately fell back down. "Oh, Nora, Nora, why did you put such a woman in my life?" John sighed heavily. "I didn't know that she loved someone else." Nora looked at her son and smiled a little. But he didn't see it, immersed in his own thoughts, swirling in his alcohol-fogged mind. "Friend," Oswin said, "you can't do that to a man. You can't." "Oh, that's it." Nora waved her hand at her husband. "Enough of this Veronica talk. Change the subject." Christopher rose from the table and staggered away. "I'm going home," he muttered, and staggered from wall to wall into the hallway. "What home?" "You're staying here," Nora said, rushing after her son. "You can barely stand on your feet." "I'm fine. I want to go home," he said, trying to put on his sneakers. "Ma, call a cab." Nora went to the room where her phone was, and after calling a cab, she immediately called Veronica. "What's taking so long?" "Come downstairs in 15 minutes, she told her. "Why?" she asked her. And Nora immediately realized that her friend was crying again. "Enough with the snot. What's your condition, by the way?" "Sober, partially." "Why?" "I got a present for you. I want you at the front door in 15 minutes. "What kind of present?" Veronica asked. But Nora had already hung up. Nora went back to her son. "I'll go with you," she said, trying to get her foot into her sandals. "They're so uncomfortable to wear," she grumbled, unable to get her foot in. "Nora, where are you going?" her husband asked. "Christopher can barely stand." "Where should I let him go alone? Then I'll come with you." "You're not standing very well either." Oswin wandered over to his wife and son. "Everything is under control," Nora replied, holding on to the door jamb. "You friend, renaminate. Ugh. Anyway, we're on our own. I'm not going back. I'm staying at Christopher's." Veronica stood holding onto the porch railing outside her front room, puzzling over what kind of gift her friend had prepared for her. 10 minutes later, a cab pulled up beside her, and Nora fell out of it but got up immediately and opened the back door, wobbling. "Help her," she said to Veronica, and she saw drunken Christopher in the back seat, who, unlike Nora, got out of the cab and stood on his feet, but immediately staggered, and Nora hugged her son from one side, holding him so he wouldn't fall. Veronica came from the other side and almost fell over herself, putting her arm around his shoulder. "Were you still drinking?" Nora asked her, noticing that she was no more sober than she'd been a few hours ago. "A drop," Veronica replied. "Nora, where is he like that?" She immediately turned her gaze to Christopher, for she had never seen him drunk. "At our place," she answered. Christopher looked at Veronica. The pungent odor of alcohol hit her nose, even though she wasn't drunk. "What are you doing here?" he mumbled. "Christopher, I live here," she answered, looking up at him with eyes full of tears. He looked at the house. "That's right. What am I doing here? I don't live here." "Go on, dear," said Nora, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "You're heavy, son." They went to Veronica's house and took Christopher's sneakers off and laid him on the bed. He turned on his side, hugged his pillow, and closed his eyes. "Let's go and have some tea," Nora said to her friend. "I've never seen him like this," Veronica said, turning on the kettle. "Neither have I. It's all because of you." "Nora, please don't be so angry with me." "All right, pour the tea already." "Do you think he still loves me?" Veronica asked sadly, putting a cup of tea with mint in front of her friend. "You should have seen how he went off on John today because of you." "Of course he does, but I don't know why." She looked at her friend reproachfully. "John? He's drinking too, and it's because of you. You're driving the men crazy, bitch." "Nora, I feel bad enough as it is, and you're still..." Veronica sighed. "What if Christopher doesn't want to see me when he wakes up?" "You'll see what happens when he wakes up. If you make my son suffer again, then I'll strangle you for sure." Veronica smiled slightly and put her palm on her friend's hand. "Nora, I love him. I've never loved anyone so much. What can I do with you? You love yourselves. You should have told me right off the bat." "Oh, man, we've known each other for so many years. Did you think I wouldn't understand and support you? For me, his happiness is the most important thing, and with whom it's up to him. And you're not a stranger to me. I've been worried about you for so many years." Veronica hugged Nora. "Thank you." Oh, okay, I'm gonna go." Nora got up from her chair. "So you can stay at my place. Where are you going to go like that again?" "No, you guys can settle this without me. And when you do, call me. I'm going to the next door. I'll get there." Veronica kissed her friend goodbye and went to her room. She covered Christopher with a blanket and lay down beside him, stroking his hair gently. "What a fool I am," she whispered. Veronica was dreading the morning, for she didn't know how he would react to waking up in her house next to her. But her friend's words gave her hope that things might get better. Veronica woke up and immediately looked at Christopher. He was still asleep, and she sighed with relief. She was in a bad way. Her head ached and her whole body ached. She went down to the drugstore next door and bought some antiformalin. When she got home, she saw that Christopher was still asleep and went to the kitchen, immediately taking one pill. Veronica was nervous. She didn't know if Nora was awake, but she decided to call her. "I'm dying," she answered the phone and yawned. Likewise, already ran to the drugstore and bought some hangover pills, waiting for them to kick in. "Is Christopher still asleep?" "Yeah. Why don't I run over to your place and drop off some pills?" "I got some. I'm being thoughtful. I'll get to my bag. Nora's out of bed. That's it. I don't drink anymore. Let's just say we celebrated us day yesterday. By the way, happy holidays." "Yeah, you too. When are you going home?" "Oh, I don't know. I'm going to lie around. I'm breaking down into atoms. I'll call you later. The fridge is empty, so I'll come eat at your place later." "Of course you will." After talking to her friend, Veronica decided to cook something to take her mind off her worries and pass the time. Christopher loved her pies, so she decided to bake his favorite, with strawberries. She would also make homemade shawarma, as she had all the ingredients for it. She didn't know if Christopher liked shawarma, but she always wanted it after too much alcohol, and so did Nora. Veronica went into the room periodically to see if he was awake, but Christopher was still asleep. When the shawarma was done and she'd just put the pie in the oven, she came in again. Christopher opened his eyes a little, wrapped his arms around his head and sighed heavily. "It sucks," he said, and Veronica immediately went to the kitchen to get water and a life-saving pill, which personally helped her a lot. "Take it, please. It'll make you feel better." She handed him the water and the pill, looking at him with a look full of misery. Her heart was pounding frantically. Veronica was very afraid that Christopher would leave, sending her away. "Thank you." He sat down. After returning the empty glass to Veronica, Christopher plopped back on the bed and closed his eyes. "More water," he said in a pleading tone. And Veronica immediately went back to the kitchen. "Here." She handed him a full glass, which he emptied. "What smells so good?" he asked, yawning. "I'm baking a pie and I made shawarma. I don't know if you like it or not. It's right in front of my eyes." He smiled a little, and then he cringed with a headache. "I'll try to get to the kitchen." Veronica smiled and exhaled with relief. "I can bring it to you here. You lie down," she said. "I can make it to the kitchen," he said, sighing heavily. Veronica heated up some shawarma for herself and Christopher. Yawning, he walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table. "Mom, what a smell," he said, and took a bite of the shawarma. "Is it good?" she asked. "Awesome," he replied. After finishing the shawarma, he sighed peacefully. "That's much better. Thank you. I'm going to take a shower. I remember where the towels are." Christopher got up from the table and walked out of the kitchen. "There's a new toothbrush in the cabinet," Veronica shouted to him. "Okay, thank you." Veronica still didn't know what to expect. She was starting to get nervous again. What if he takes a shower and leaves, she thought. Christopher stepped out of the shower in just a towel and returned to the kitchen, taking his old seat. "Now it's even better. Let's have some pie." He smiled, and Veronica took the pie out of the oven and began cutting it into slices. Christopher watched her, still smiling, and when she was done, he took her hand and pulled her sharply to him, sitting her on his lap, and she just gasped in surprise. "You've driven me to alcoholism," he said, his nose in her hair. Veronica's soul trembled again. She felt insanely happy. "Please forgive me, I'm such a fool," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. Christopher raised his head and looked into her eyes. "John said you ran away from him, saying you loved someone else. May I ask who?" he asked. "You," Veronica replied, looking at him fondly. "I love you very much." Christopher got up from his chair and with Veronica in his arms headed for her room. "What about the pie?" she asked, laughing. "The pie can wait," he replied, covering her neck with kisses. As he laid her on the bed, he leaned over her, and Veronica saw again in his gaze the fierce desire that made her heart flutter. "I hope you are no longer tormented by your prejudices." "And no more doubts?" he asked quietly. "I was only tormented by the words you said to me when you left and nothing else," she answered. "I was angry and I was in a lot of pain. Veronica, I love you. I've loved you since I first saw you. But nothing could happen between us then. And now we can be together, and I want that more than anything. And I do. When you left me, I realized how much I loved you." Christopher kissed her immediately, and Veronica dissolved into her feelings again. And this time her mind was at peace with those feelings. Nora had already called Veronica several times, but she didn't answer. After waiting another half an hour, she called again. "Finally," she said when she finally answered, "You've been reconciling for a long time, and I'm starving." "Come, I'll feed you," Veronica said, resting her head on Christopher's chest again. "How long has she known?" he asked, stroking her back. "She found out yesterday." Veronica remembered yesterday and smiled. So she came from you like that. We all had a good time last night, of course, Christopher laughed. Yeah, I don't even remember being like that last night. Veronica kissed Christopher on the lips, got up and put on her robe. She'll be right in. Just then the doorbell rang. Nora looked at her disheveled friend and smiled. I see you've made up, she said, walking into the kitchen. What flavors? Let's feed the hungry mother-in-law. Nora sat down at the table. Shawarma? Veronica asked her, knowing that Nora, like her, loves it after a binge. There's also pie. Give me all of it. Christopher got dressed and went into the kitchen. Hi, Mommy. How are you feeling? He asked his mother and sat down across from her, sitting Veronica on his lap. I think I'm alive, she replied. I'll eat now and it will be even better. She looked at her son and seeing him so happy, she was happy herself. She was happy for her friend too, for she had never seen her eyes so bright as when she looked at her son. When are we going to introduce the bride to her father and sister? She asked Christopher. Next weekend, he replied, smiling. That's great. But I think we'd better get them ready beforehand. I'll take care of that. Nora took a bite of the shawarma. Mom, that's good. That's happiness. You'll spoil me more often with her and your pies, Nora smiled at Veronica. Nora, anything for you, she replied. After eating enough, Nora started to get ready to go home. I'm going to go and see if Dad's alive. I'll come with you, Christopher said. I have to pick up the car. He kissed Veronica and left the apartment with Nora. Son, why didn't you tell me anything about your feelings for her? She asked as they rode in the cab. Would it have made a difference in the past? Christopher looked at his mother. I don't think so, Nora sighed. Why now? I had to get her first, and then I was going to tell you and Father. Christopher, I'm very happy for you. Nora kissed her son on the cheek. Thank you, Mom. I always knew you would understand. Your happiness is the most important thing to me, son. And I always wanted the same for Veronica. Veronica was waiting for Christopher. She had a smile on her lips. She was also glad she hadn't lost her friend. When will you move in with me? Christopher asked when he got back to her house. He stared at Veronica, and this time he saw no sign of confusion or careful thought on her face. She smiled and immediately wrapped her arms around his torso, pressing herself against his chest. Right now, she whispered, will you marry me? Yes. And Veronica looked up, her eyes wide enough to read the answer to that question without words. Christopher pulled out the ring he'd bought on the way to her house, stopping at the nearest jewelry store. Yes. Veronica put the ring on and immediately pressed herself against him again. She was overflowing with happiness and no more doubts. She had never been so sure of her decision. Then let's get your things together. Christopher smiled contentedly, pulling her tightly against him. The following Saturday, Veronica and Christopher hurried to Nora's house, where it was no surprise to anyone who was his fiancée. I was guessing, Alice said as they sat down at the table. But I didn't, although when Christopher jumped on John, the thought crossed my mind. Oh well, at least we already know Veronica. You could say she's someone we know. So when's the wedding? In 2 months, Christopher answered, kissing Veronica on the temple. After the wedding, when they were finally alone in the hotel room, Veronica and Christopher hurriedly began to tear off each other's clothes, and their lips seemed to freeze in an endless kiss. I love you, Veronica whispered, dissolving into her feelings in the man who was now her husband. She still desired him just as much, and his kisses made her as dizzy as the first time. Now she knew for sure that their passion was just a manifestation of the love they had for each other. You are mine at last, Christopher replied. It seemed to him that he could never get enough of this woman, and he didn't want to get enough of her. He had dreamed of her for so many years and thought his love would remain unrequited. But now she belonged to him and loved him. Veronica was strolling in the park with her stroller. Here I am. Tabitha came up to her with a big, beautiful gift bag, which she immediately handed to her friend. She looked into the stroller where Veronica's daughter was sleeping. "Thank you," she replied and kissed her friend on the cheek. "Where did they put Max?" Tabitha asked about her 3-year-old son. Christopher took him to the cottage at the weekend so that Nora and Oswin wouldn't be bored. "He'll make them feel better." She laughed a little. "Christopher's going on vacation soon, so we'll be there too." Veronica had always loved Nora's dacha, which was next door to a pine forest and a lake surrounded by pine trees, where they used to go swimming with her friends' children. Could she have guessed then that the boy, always splashing water from the lake at her, picking strawberries from the beds for her, and carefully bringing a plaid in the evenings when they sat in the gazebo after so many years, would become her husband? "You look great, by the way. I've been meaning to ask you, how are your passions settling down after almost 4 years of marriage?" Tabitha distracted her friend from her memories. "I wouldn't say that," she smiled enigmatically, remembering what she and her husband sometimes did. Veronica was surprised that their passion hadn't faded over time, and she still felt her heart leap out of her chest at the sight of him, and his kisses made the ground fall away from her feet. Tabitha looked at her friend, who was glowing with happiness, and thought that it was not always worth listening to your mind. Sometimes it is the heart that can give the right advice, and the mind can go astray. It is necessary to trust your feelings, not thinking ahead, what can be and what cannot be, and do not fill your head with prejudices, and just live and love. And it's a good thing Veronica made the right choice, because she wouldn't have been as happy with John as she is with Christopher. At their wedding, Tabitha had seen the eyes they had looked at each other with, and she had been a little jealous of that fervor, and how good it was that their love had overcome all doubts and prejudices.